Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for being here today. My name is Andrew Yule. I work at Jesuit Social Services. And in a brief moment, we will begin this Worth a Second Chance webinar. And at that time, I will invite our host and moderator for today, CEO of Jesuit Social Services, Julie Edwards, to come up and introduce herself. Before we get started, though, just a couple of quick housekeeping notes. We're recording this session today so that everyone who's registered but hasn't had a chance to join us today will still have a chance to see it. So we will send an email with a link to that recording out tomorrow. We have an interactive discussion as part of this webinar, and you're welcome to ask questions towards the end of the webinar. Please use the question button to do that, not the chat. So we'll try and keep the chat for making commentary and statements as we go throughout the webinar. And later on, when it comes time for the Q&A session, if you want to use the specific Q&A function, that would be great. We do have closed captions enabled for the webinar. They generally are quite good, but sometimes they misspell names and places. So we will have a staff member using the chat function to correct some of those. So keep an eye on the chat area if anything seems a little out of place. If you want to turn on your closed captions, there is an option down in the toolbar along the bottom there that you can click on. I think that's all the housekeeping we need from me. So I will now invite Jesuit Social Services CEO Julie Edwards, if you could turn on your video and audio, and we will begin the webinar. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Andrew. Hi, everyone, and welcome. It's wonderful to have you join us today, and it shows the deep interest that there is in this topic. And I feel we're at a time where there's a bit of momentum for change. So I'm really grateful for your presence here today. I want to hand over now to Wurundjeri Elder, Auntie Diane Kerr, for her welcome to country. She's welcoming us because our central office here is in Richmond, Melbourne, and she's going to welcome us and also acknowledge the presence of other First Nations people here with us today. Thanks, Auntie Diane.
Thank you very much for inviting me here. I honour my ancestors and my elders, and I pay homage to the sacred grounds we're all on. I wish to acknowledge any elders and the elders of different nations, and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander persons, any First Nations peoples from across the waters, and I acknowledge you all, and I pay my respects to your ancestors, elders and families. It's an honour and a privilege to be able to come back and do your welcome again today. And the topic is quite interesting to me because, as you know, we have very young ones in the juvenile system. You have young ones incarcerated. And when I think of my grandchildren and their age and that there are young persons in the juvenile system, I get really, really upset. It is time for a change. It's time that we took a stock of what is happening to our children, and it's so hard for them in this day and age, particularly in communities that aren't safe and communities that don't look after each other. So I want you all, while you're doing this seminar, to chat to someone that you don't know and share who you are and where you come from. I firmly believe if we can understand each other, that we can live in harmony. When we live in harmony, we eradicate racism and stigma, and we pave the way for our young ones. They can live in peace and walk our streets without fear of any harm. And all it takes is an open heart and an open hand. So I offer you all my hand in friendship so that we can journey together. May Bunjil, my creator, surround you all and give you strength and resilience. Womanjika, Wurundjeri Balik, Yimangundibik. That means welcome to Wurundjeri country. I wish to welcome you from the tops of the trees to the roots in the ground. So we look after country and we look after each other. Country will look after us. And I say Nungodjin, that means thank you. Thank you for allowing me to be a part of your journey today and have a wonderful webinar. Nungodjin.
Thank you, Auntie Diane, and thanks for that warm welcome and circling back to the importance of our connections with each other. So very grateful for your presence here with us today, and pointing out, of course, that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander young people are overrepresented in the criminal justice system, something that we really all need to do something about. So thanks for those comments. Shortly, you're going to hear from our expert panel, and I'm very grateful for their presence here today. But the next thing I'd like to do is share with you a couple of videos. At Jesuit Social Services, when we have events like this, we really like to feature the voice of young people wherever possible. And so today we're welcoming someone from the Artful Dodgers studios. It just points to the enormous talent that young people have. It sets a positive tone, and it just creates a really welcoming atmosphere and reminds us that young people are at the centre of our concerns and of our work. So I'm pleased to share this performance from an amazing young singer-songwriter named Alara. So please enjoy their performance.
Hi, I'm Alara. This is the song that I wrote. It's called Not for a Child's Mind. It's just about how much you're willing to give chances to someone until it puts too much stress on yourself that you can't do it anymore. So, I hope you enjoy. Yeah. If you fall from the needle straw, I'll come back to you in a rehab room. But if I can't help again, we can break some bread as you pat my head. 'Cause even at 17, you're still with me. You're still with me. Even if you left when she was 8, you're on my mind no matter just how late you were. Safe when your demons came out to play. It wasn't safe with those red eyes, not for a child's mind. She's cried to me, not able to sleep. Do you feel guilty when you couldn't get through the door, blocked by her furniture? Did you know your daughter, if she begged for you, is it mind you to what you're going through? Are you alive, alive, alive when you shoved her around and you broke her crown? Did you say goodbye? You alive, 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 alive. When your demons came out to play, it wasn't safe with those red eyes, not for a child's mind. Your veins can't contain this much broken love, and my child, this won't go on much while. Rage and violence, you're not a slave to the silence. You're not a slave, you're not a slave. you were safe when your demons came out to play. It wasn't safe with those red eyes, not for a child's mind.
Thanks very much, Alara. Really appreciate your pre-recording that for us for today's webinar. Another thing that matters to us at Jesuit Social Services, besides seeing the great creativity and potential of young people, is making sure that we centre the voice of young people caught up in the criminal justice system. And so today I want to introduce a short video from a young man named Aaron, who became involved with the criminal justice system after falling in with a crowd that wasn't good for him, making bad choices, etc. Because today we do want to explore the trajectory, I suppose, into the justice system. Aaron's story is particularly pertinent to the conversation we'll be having today for that reason, and invite you to enjoy hearing from Aaron right now. Thanks.
I'm Aaron Naden, born in Sunshine. I grew up around Footscray. I'm 23 years old, and my mob is from I'm a Barkindji person, so that runs up from Madura all the way through New South Wales on the Murray River. Growing up in Footscray, yeah, it's a bit like a circus. You meet a lot of different people. You know, some good crowds and some bad crowds, and I ended up finding a bad crowd to hang around with. First, it was just hanging around with people doing graffiti. It was so cool to steal cars, or it was really cool to go into Coles Liquor and steal this 10-pack of alcohol. It was just the way that we all brought up and the way we lived. It was just so, like, we were just so used to it. If you didn't go into the bottle shop and steal a 10-pack, you weren't one of the boys. So yeah, it was just like, like a reputation. Like, if you want to hang out with us, you've got to do what we do. That's what happens when you're in that game and you want to fit in. I never went to juvenile prison, but I'll be honest, I was probably on that way to go to juvenile. Just the lot of stuff I was doing when I was young, driving around in stolen cars. I was doing a lot of assaults, in a phrase, and recklessly cause injury, and that was from drinking alcohol. But I was doing a lot of stuff, stealing from shops, clothes, alcohol, walking around with knives in my pocket, getting chased by coppers, thinking it was fun. Reflecting on when I was a youth, if my worker or my court got me involved with like a young men's group, like where we meet up, I reckon that would have helped, because like, I would have felt like I wasn't the only youth going through this kind of life I was living. The reason why I ended up in jail was because of my drug addiction and my choices that I was making. I was using really, really heavily on the methamphetamines, and I was choosing dumb decisions. I ended up getting bail, and then as soon as I got bail again, I went straight back onto the drugs again. That was the first time I ever sat down and actually listened to my dad, about changing my ways and changing my choices and my ideas and my thinking. And it really, really hit home, because, I just really wanted to hear his voice, and I actually heard it on the TV. So, yeah, in that time, I wrote down 3 goals, and it was to be a good father, because I've got a 6-year-old daughter that's just turned 6. And I've got a beautiful father that's in this house at the moment, sitting down in his couch. I'm under his roof, and then I've got to look after myself. So yeah, I wrote 3 goals: be a good father, be a good son, and stay clean and sober. Because as much as I was hurting everyone else in the community and my family and my friends, I was hurting myself most of all. Now I'm a year and 19 days clean, and I'm loving life. My life right now is absolutely amazing. There's nothing I will change for it. You know, I'm happy, I'm peaceful, I'm back to that original Aaron that was born on this planet. You know, I'm a caring, loving person now. You know, there's no stress or pain in my life. I'm not worrying, I'm not looking over my shoulder anymore if coppers are there, or, you know, I'm not walking down the street thinking someone's going to hurt me. You know, I've got a car, I've got my license, I've got my daughter back in my life. Now I understand the difference between that life and this life. This life is, you know, you can have so much fun, you know, in crime and drug life, but it all goes nowhere. You end up with nothing. You lose your friends, you lose your family members. In this life, I've got everything that I ever wanted. You know, I want you know, it was just happiness and being healthy, and you know, waking up, you know, to my dad's voice and speaking to my daughter. Yeah, just, it's unexplainable until you live it, but it's such a better life. I'm one of multiple people who have this kind of journey, but you know, I'm trying to make the change to say that we can all change, and you know, we all have a desire to stop, but we've got to have a desire to stop, and it takes a lot for people like us to get out of that world. But you know, like, we're not just animals, we're human beings too, you know. And yeah, we did make some dumb choices and bad decisions, but you know, it's pretty hard to change, and it's really difficult for a new change. But if I keep living the way I'm living, you know, my future is just going to be bright as anything.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Aaron. And you can see that Aaron is giving us one example, just one example of the trajectory into the criminal justice system. And today we'll have an opportunity to hear a bit more what other characteristics that are shared, as well as the individual features that might lead a young person to be in custody, to actually be doing harm to themselves and to others. Of course, there are many compounding factors that contribute to young people getting into that position, and it's these factors that need to be addressed if we want to see these young people thrive, if we want there to be less crime, if we want there to be fewer victims and stronger communities. And that's what we're here to discuss today. We have an expert panel, and I'll be introducing them to you shortly. The panel's going to speak about some of the systemic, social and behavioural factors that lead young people to become caught up in the criminal justice system. Then we'll come together for a facilitated question and answer session, and your questions are welcome. And if we don't get to them all, post them anyhow, and we'd be happy to get back to you. Before I introduce our panel, I just want to paint a bit of a picture, though, of how challenging and complex things can be for the young people who are caught up in our criminal justice system. So just a snapshot, the Youth Parole Board does an annual picture of who's in custody. So first of all, let me go to Australia-wide. On an average night in Australia, there are 819 children between 10 and 17 locked up in youth detention facilities. 91% of them are boys. So we have a gendered problem here, don't we? Our research, conducted by the Men's Project, is called the Man Box, and it tells us that young men who adhere to rigid and outdated ideas of masculinity are much more likely to use violence and engage in other risk-taking behaviours. We also, as Auntie Diane said, disproportionately see Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in youth detention. Young Indigenous people represent less than 6% of all young people aged 10 to 17 in Australia, but make up 40% of all young people in detention. Data from mid-2021 showed that Indigenous children are jailed at up to 20 times the rate of non-Indigenous children across Australia, and also are more likely to be under the age of 18 when incarcerated. We're very clear here at Jesuit Social Services about why this is the case. What we're seeing here is the enduring impacts of colonisation and dispossession, and our ongoing failure as a society to right things as we continue to fail Indigenous people and communities. In Victoria, where much of Jesuit Social Services work is located, the Youth Parole Board, as I said, gives us an annual snapshot of some of the experiences of young people in detention in this state. And that data tells us that 70% of these young people are victims of abuse, trauma, or neglect, that nearly half have experienced family violence, half also have been involved in the child protection system. 90% of young people in detention have used or misused drugs, and 2/3 have used or misused alcohol. So this data underlines the fact that the overwhelming majority of children in custody are highly disadvantaged and have been pushed to the margins. They have complex and intersecting problems that present at much higher rates than the rest of their peers in the rest of the community. It's also worth noting, though, that we incarcerate young people, but it's not working. In Victoria, we know that just under 50% of young people aged 10 to 16 who were released from sentence supervision return within 12 months. By any measure, this is a failed and failing system. And just today, we've seen media coverage in The Age and on ABC Radio about the use of isolation on children at Parkville Youth Detention Centre, with children held in solitary confinement for more than 22 hours a day. This is in breach of, everyone's rights who are in that position. Jesuit Social Services has long been concerned about the use and the impact of isolation on people in detention and the physical and mental impact it has. We previously released a discussion paper about the use of isolation on young adults, that is the 18 to 25-year-old group in detention. We'll paste that link in the chat now if you're interested in learning more. So it's clear our current approaches aren't working. They're doing more harm. And the case for reform, though, as I intimated at the outset, is gathering momentum. A particularly topical area of reform, which you'd have seen in the news recently, is the campaign to increase the minimum age of criminal responsibility, which is 10 years currently in Australian jurisdictions, except for Northern Territory, who just recently passed legislation to lift it to 12, and that'll come into effect later in the year. That means that in most places in Australia, a 10-year-old primary school-age child can be arrested, charged, and imprisoned. The Australian Capital Territory is also in the process of raising the age, and the Victorian Premier Daniel Andrews recently committed to raising the age. Now, we don't yet know what that will look like. We want to see it raised to 14, not 12, and with no exceptions. We've been advocating for this for well over a decade, and we welcome these positive changes. The evidence has been clear for quite a while that Australia is out of step with international human rights standards and medical science regarding child development by continuing to incarcerate primary school-aged children. And I know that one of our guest speakers will be speaking to that specifically. So raising the age of criminal responsibility will make a difference, and it will help keep young people away from a life of crime, and it will help keep the community safer. It'll interrupt a cycle of injustice, and it will lead to further ripple effects out into the community that we'll all benefit from. So we really want you to join our campaign and others about raising the age of criminal responsibility. So all that's good news, but as we're talking about positive changes like this, I wanted to pause and think about what happens to get a 10-year-old in prison in the first place. So now to our panellists. They're going to speak about the systemic, social and behavioural factors that lead children into the justice system and share some ideas for some more appropriate responses that still hold young people to account without involving the justice system. Because often when someone is committing a crime, they're on a wrong path, and we do want to help them. We want to accompany them. We want to hold them to account, but we also want to support them as they move to a more positive lifestyle. Our first panelist will speak about what's happening inside children. What's their thinking? What's the processing that's going on? How are they making decisions as they take risks and spend time with influential peers? Dr. Mick Creety is a paediatrician at the Royal Children's Hospital in Melbourne. He's very engaged in public advocacy to raise the age of criminal responsibility. And today he'll speak about the development of children's brains and how that brain development impacts a child's capacity to be responsible for their actions. It's a great pleasure to welcome Mick, who's been, as I say, a long-term advocate, and we're very grateful for your being with us today, Mick. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks, Julie. I'd just like to acknowledge also that I'm talking to you from Wurundjeri country. I'm at the Wadja family place at the Royal Children's Hospital. I'd like to thank Julie and Jesuit Social Services for hosting this event. And really, it's good interesting to reflect on Arden's words. I'm just going to try and share my slides because I think a picture tells 1,000 words. I'm not sure does that come up? I'll just go on assuming that's up. And look, I was asked to talk about brain development and the capacity to be criminally responsible. I think, the heading says it all. I use this heading a lot in my talks. Too young for Facebook, old enough for prison. I mean, I could almost stop my presentation there. I think society recognises children are vulnerable at the age of 10 and then vulnerable to stalking and abuse on social media, but and because they haven't got the capacity to make informed decisions. And the criminal justice system just flies in the face of that and says that children can be criminally responsible for their actions and decisions at the age of 10. Now, I put this up again just to emphasise we're talking about children. Two of those three are my children. Those children are all above 10 when that photo was taken. They're all old enough at that stage to be arrested, held in police cells, potentially strip searched, brought before a magistrate and incarcerated. We are really talking about young children. And this, I just laughed at when I saw it at the Children's Hospital. The Children's Hospital is now recommending car seats until children are 145 centimetres in height, and the average 10-year-old is 138 centimetres. So I said to Mark Dreyfus once, look, if you can't change the legislation to raise the age, can you at least make sure that the police are taking children to jail in car seats, which are approved by the Children's Hospital? We're really talking about young children. This is the neuroscience, and we now have functional MRI pictures, and it gets a bit technical, but the part of the brain, what we call the prefrontal cortex, that's the box, that's the area in the white box, is not fully developed until you're about 20, 25 years of age. And that bit of the brain is important because that bit of the brain helps you anticipate and foresee the consequences of your actions. It helps you be less impulsive, and we can see children are getting locked up for really impulsive actions like jumping in a car which has been stolen. The 10-year-old might be on the side of the road and his mates will say, oh, you get in the car or we'll leave you on the side of the road. So without thinking through the consequences of his actions, that kid's now involved in a crime because he's an accessory to a crime because he's in a stolen car. And it's interesting to reflect on Arden's comment that he made some dumb decisions. I don't think they're dumb decisions. I think they're decisions which are completely explainable by a child's neurodevelopment at the age Arden was when he was getting into trouble. And look, society does not expect children to make decisions at 10 again. Vic Road says you haven't got the capacity to cross the road safely until you're 12. So that capacity to plan and do things safely is really not developed in a 10-year-old. And even myself as an adult, I still do impulsive things like go to the supermarket and without thinking the chocolates are in my trolley without planning. We all do impulsive actions, but children at the age of 10 are much more impulsive than us.
Hi, Mick. Sorry to interrupt you. Sorry about that. Just wanted to let you know the slides haven't gone past the first slide yet. I don't know if you're able.
Wow. I don't know what's happening. Is that coming through, Andrew?
Still on the first slide at the moment.
You're sharing screen. Okay, I'll stop sharing.
Okay.
and I will start to share again. Share again, and slides, PowerPoint slideshow. Is that any different?
We've now got a different slide and it looks like it changes. Yes.
Okay, sorry guys. Yeah. So that's the brain development. I spoke about it, just some nice boxes. We'll go on to trauma. We've talked a bit about trauma. We know that trauma affects brain development, and these are pictures of different brains. A child on the left, no trauma, the child on the right, an abused brain. And this is really important because we know, as we heard before, if we take that trauma is common in these children, in children involved in the justice system. And if we take child protection as a proxy for trauma, it's not until about 14 that children, and fewer than 50% of children involved in the child protection system have involvement in the child protection. So before the age of 10, up to 2/3 of children have involvement in the child protection system. That causes trauma. Trauma affects your brain. That affected brain again makes you more impulsive and less able to think through the consequences of your actions. So we almost get into a vicious cycle where the most traumatized children are further traumatized by going into the custodial system. So there was this study done in Western Australia where they actually went in and looked at the neurodevelopment and mental health of about 100 or 90 children locked up, 99 children locked in detention in Western Australia, and at least 90% or around 90% had at least one severe neurodevelopmental impairment, whether it be FASD, ADHD. So as well as locking up children who are traumatized, as well as locking up children who are young and have poor impulse control and poor capacity to see through the consequences of their actions, we are locking up children, most of whom have an additional disability or mental health illness, which can be causing them not to express behaviours which bring them in contact with the police. The sad thing about the study is that these conditions were largely undiagnosed before they got into prison. So we are locking up children without even knowing if they've got an intellectual disability in many cases, and I certainly saw that when I was the doctor in Parkville. So finally, as Julie has mentioned, today in the age that we are traumatising children by locking them up 22 hours a day, and the standards of care and trauma are so different in jail. Now, if we go to the, I'll put this up a bit facetiously, but the censorship board says we need parental guidance to watch Lassie. We are locking kids up at 10 and further traumatising them much more than without parental guidance from the age of 10. So that is all I want to say. I'm sorry about the slides. I can share them later. And I think I'll stop sharing them. I'm back with you, I think.
That's great, Mick. And slides or no slides, you painted a very powerful picture of what's going on, though those visuals are pretty significant. You know, when you actually showed the brain that's been traumatized, and yeah, it really just fills out the picture for us, I suppose, about when we keep saying about holding people to account, which we want to, and help people reset lives. You know, we failed a lot of these young people from earliest days, actually, and then punished them for that. So we'll come back to you, I'm sure, with a number of questions, Mick, in the Q&A session for the panel. I'm very pleased now to introduce some Jesuit social services staff who work with young people in this situation. So first, we're going to hear from Cameron Rock, who coordinates Jesuit Social Services Connections mentoring program. This program pairs young people leaving out-of-home care with mentors in the community in order to form a positive and supportive social relationship. We know the importance of relationship and how healing that can be in its own right. We also know that, you know, well over 40%, just under 50% of young people in detention in Victoria have been or are currently subject to child protection order. So we're not saying this is causal, but there is a strong correlation between involvement in the out-of-home care system and hearing what Mick just said about the trauma that we can assume often occurs as a result of that, and involvement in the youth justice system. So Cameron's going to speak to us now about challenges that young people face in family relationships and in institutional settings, and the importance, again, of relationships in a young person's pathway out of the justice system. Welcome, Cameron.
Thank you, Julie. With me. Look, I'm not here representing out-of-home care, but my background is strongly in out-of-home care, in residential units and in case management. I want to start by acknowledging the amazing work that carers and professionals do in a challenging system in out-of-home care, and how incredibly strong, talented and resilient the young people in out-of-home care are. As previously mentioned, young people in out-of-home care are very overrepresented in custody and in the juvenile justice system. So I guess I'll talk a bit about out-of-home care and the challenges and the relationship with that and the wide youth justice system, and a little bit about our Community Connections mentoring program and what that seeks to change. So as Mick was talking, a lot of the young people, or the vast majority, if not all, young people in out-of-home care have experienced trauma, which has led to them having challenges with regulating their emotions. And when young people are dysregulated, the sort of higher functioning of the brain, the executive functioning that helps us make good decisions, is almost effectively disengaged. So as a result, it's harder for young people to make good decisions. If you're interested, look into Dan Siegel and Flip the Lid, where he talks about what happens with the brain and shows it quite visually. The trauma history, or trauma experiences have also led to poor self-esteem and a negative internal narrative, where young people can often, not all young people of course, but can see themselves as not good, as bad, or not deserving of positive things in their lives. And as previously mentioned, First Nations young people are very overrepresented in this system. So I guess I seek to talk a bit, how does the setting of out-of-home care make it challenging for a young person to rehabilitate and to be accountable for their actions, you know, as that is different to a home setting, I guess. Like I said, the people working in out-of-home care are amazing, but the system involves constant change. There's a lack of stability. The rug is almost constantly pulled from under young people's feet. So they're moved to various houses, or they're moved from foster care to residential care, or different parts of the out-of-home care system. The workers that they support them are often come and go, unfortunately, like we all do in jobs, which leads to just constant change for young people. So I know we all struggle with change, and if it's happening constantly, it's just a constant everyday challenge for these young people. The young people, as a result of that and their experiences, can often feel really unsafe. They often can be placed with other young people with similar challenges. So you might have several young people, particularly in residential care, who might have struggles regulating themselves. So the environment can feel quite unsafe for the young people. They often don't want to be there. There's sort of a lack of consistent adults, I guess, who believe in them and their capacity to change. And as Mick was talking about around brain development, there's often developmental delay. So they haven't maybe achieved the same milestones as other people might have at certain ages. Through no fault of their own, but that can lead to issues with impulsivity and poor decision making, and often people seeing a 15-year-old and having a certain expectation of them when they're actually developmentally, maybe in some areas, sort of younger than that chronological age. So the relationship, look, I guess young people in out-of-home care unfortunately often end up a bit criminalised, you could say, or seen as problematic. They're often judged. Their opportunities are limited through that. They don't have the same privilege as we have with the protective factors in our lives. For instance, if a young person in our home care damages property, the police might be called and they might be charged, whereas with our own children, we would deal with that in a very different way. So they often end up criminalised at a very young age, and that snowballs, unfortunately, at times, and I guess how police interact with young people. And I'm not trying to criticise police, but there's some lack of understanding of the challenges facing young people in out-of-home care and how to respond to them appropriately. And I guess police sometimes end up with less tolerance when dealing with young people in out-of-home care. Yeah, I guess, look, there's also issues with adult criminal gangs, if we want to call them that, exploiting these young people and getting them involved in criminal activities for their benefit. They're often grooming young people. So I guess what these young people are lacking in a big way is positive, consistent, safe relationships, which a lot of us had the privilege of having. They're forced to grow up too quickly and take on things that young people that age shouldn't. So I guess what we see with our mentoring program seeks to find volunteers in the community, as Julie said, and match them with young people. Research with young people in out-of-home care would say very strongly that they want people involved in their lives who are not paid and who just there because they care and want to make a difference. And that's what the mentors in our program do. They build safe relationships with these young people. They give them an experience of stability and safety. They act as almost guides, mentors. They someone to turn to for support. They're someone to give some understanding. So I guess they're trying to fulfill that role that unfortunately some of the parents or families in that young person's world have not maybe been able to fulfill. So I guess what we see with young people in out-of-home care is young people who are very disadvantaged. They're in a system that is not as compassionate as we might wish. Sorry, that's my alarm to wrap things up. But I guess they're just, they have a lack of protective factors. They have a lot of challenges. They don't feel accepted. They feel very judged. And they end up seeking connection, maybe in the wrong places. I better wrap up or I'll keep talking. So my apologies.
Thanks very much, Cameron. And I think you've actually highlighted a really important thing. We all seek connection. We all seek to be in relationship. And the importance of the program that you coordinate is actually providing some positive role models, some positive connections to fill some of the gaps that might be left. So thanks very much for telling us about that, and we'll hear more from you on the panel. So we're now going to hear from Michelle de Aouis, who's a senior practitioner in Jesuit Social Services Youth Justice Community Support Service. This program provides intensive integrated support to young people up to 21 years old who are involved with the justice system in Victoria. Michelle will speak about some of the significant barriers or challenges that young people she works with face, including, access to stable and safe housing, access to education, being able to complete their education, addressing mental health problems, finding pathways to employment, and many of the other things, of course, that we all want and that are natural developmental milestones in a young person's life. But the young people we work with face significant barriers when they try to achieve those milestones. So Michelle's going to talk to us about that and about what can be done to support young people to overcome some of those barriers. Thanks, Michelle.
Can you guys hear me? Oh. Hi guys, I'm Michelle. I work for Youth Justice Community Support Service. Julie's also mentioned a few things about our service, but I thought I'd just start with a bit of an overview of what the Youth Justice Community Support Service looks like, some of the issues that we are seeing with our young people that we're working with and their families. So I've been with the Youth Justice Community Support Service for 10 years now. We work with 10 to 21-year-olds. We get our referrals from Youth Justice, and usually we have a bit of an understanding about the young people that we're working with going in, where Youth Justice will identify some of the gaps that need to be filled by intensive support. We do a lot of assertive outreach with our families and with our young people. We help them to address some of the systemic issues that they've been facing, such as like disrupted education, unstable housing, drug and alcohol misuse, diagnosed or undiagnosed disabilities, mental health and trauma, including intergenerational trauma, family violence, and just lack of community in general. When I start working with a young person, it's generally within the custody setting. So going in, building a trusting relationship with the young person and building up that rapport with them, and getting to know their families also if they have family involvement. A lot of the time, our young people don't have a strong family involvement, and there is that lack of community and connection. So through the work that we do, we try to figure out where we can support them to become a positive community member again and get them back living as normal a life as possible. With the goal setting that we do with young people, trying to get them to stay focused on certain tasks, we're able to help them identify even the most basic of issues and which ones that they want to work on first. So, for example, I might get a young person who has no housing, who has no family involvement at the moment, significant drug and alcohol issues, and possible mental health. We have a transitional housing service as well with Jesuit Social Services, and we're able to offer certain housing options for young people where we place them in a unit. We're able to supply some intensive work with them and help build up their independent living skills when they are back out in the community. Some of the struggles, though, that I have noticed a lot with working with the young people is the lack of education. It's a big barrier. The disrupted education has been sometimes dating back to primary school age, and I think earlier interventions could be put in place to help support the young people that we work with so that it isn't so much of an issue and that they have an adequate source of education. Something that we can do, though, is help link them in and make some positive referrals for them. So they might not be able to access mainstream education, but some alternative education can also be utilised with our young people, linking them into those mental health services and getting them assessed if they have undiagnosed disabilities is also really important. A young person that I work with currently is 19 years old, has been known to have a disability for quite a long time, but nobody's really taken those steps to help link them in with those appropriate services. And through his what people appear to be as immature due to ADHD and to the intellectual disability, he has fallen into the justice system and isn't liked by the police. We've been able to get him referred to NDIS. We've been able to help him find positive housing and get him really settled in life. he's now working a full-time job with an employer who has a lot of knowledge, I guess, around how to deal with young people with disabilities. So I guess that's just one example of like a really positive outcome for somebody who is very marginalised, who has a very complex history and a history of trauma as well. I think 90% roughly of the young people that I've worked with in my time with YGSIS has very complex trauma issues, which can make it very difficult when we are building up that relationship with them. There is a big distrust for certain services, statutory services, and we have the luxury of being a voluntary service. But other than that, I don't know how much longer I've got. I'm working with a lot of migrant and refugee background young people, and same sort of situation, that intergenerational trauma. We're trying to help young people who are trying to live in Australia, who have been brought up in Australia from a very young age, but who come from a migrant background. And that's where our Cultural Connections team come in place. We have after hours support. So we're not just 9 to 5 service, we're also able to cater up to 10:30 at night, where young people are also needing those supports. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much, Michelle. I think you've rounded out the picture even further, pointing to some of the complexities, the importance of taking into account people's actual situation, the matters they might be dealing with at home, also the fact that many people come from backgrounds where there is trauma, intergenerational trauma, and now it all sits on the shoulders of a very young 10-year-old or above. And so you really point to the importance of all of the universal services that need to be strengthened. And I heard what you said, particularly about engagement with education. We have a school here at Jesuit Social Services called the Ignatius Learning Centre for 15 to 17-year-old boys in the criminal justice system. And most of them, almost all of them, have been completely disengaged from school for quite a long time. So we need to make our universal systems accountable as well. So we're going to invite the panel, but I just want to introduce someone who's not speaking but is going to be a member of our panel, and that is Blanche Horgan. Thanks, Blanche, for joining us. Blanche is a senior dual diagnosis practitioner in our Connections program. Connections supports young people aged 16 to 28 who have a dual diagnosis of mental illness and substance use problems. And as a member of the panel, Blanche will be able to provide specific insight into some of the complexities in young people's lives and how some of those intersect with offending, for example, a problem with substance abuse. So we've got all our panellists back. I've got a couple of questions to kick it off. In fact, I've got loads of questions, but I won't dominate this, but I'll definitely kick off. But it'd be really good. I can see a couple of questions already coming in. So feel free, if you're in the audience, to send in your questions. So first of all, Mick, I've got my first two are for you. You painted a bit of a picture, and literally with those diagrams of the brain as well, about the impact of trauma. You talked about child involvement in the child protection system could be almost seen as a proxy for trauma. So I'd like to ask you now, if you could just dig in a little bit and help us understand the effect perhaps of incarceration, let alone, as we've known, these long periods of isolation, but incarceration generally, or other involvement in the criminal justice system on a young person's overall development and well-being.
Yeah, so I'll just go back to the trauma and involvement in child protection. I gave evidence at Uruk just before Christmas, and there is really, I think, a triple trauma of being in the child protection system. There's a trauma of why you were removed in the first place, and for Aboriginal children, Task Force 1000 said that was 85% violence, 85% alcohol, and mental drug and alcohol issues, and mental health issues in parents. So children being removed because they've had the early childhood trauma. Then there's the trauma of being removed from your parents, and then there's the trauma of being in the child protection system. Most kids enter the child protection system in the first year of life in Victoria. They don't enter the child protection system as criminals, but there's often a pathway to criminality. So I think, you know, I clearly see kids who've, I saw a child yesterday at the Aboriginal Health Service who'd had 20-something placements by the age of 10. So I think Cameron talked about that insecurity. So these children have attachment issues and insecure attachments, and going into child, which leads to I don't like calling it criminal behaviour. I like calling it behaviour that gets in contact with the police force. And going into the justice system removes people from their families, removes people from people they know, and we know that the most important things in that development between childhood and adulthood is engagement with school, and we've talked about this, consistency, engagement with positive peer relations, engagement with family, engagement with community, and removing children and putting them in the justice system actually takes them away from all those pro-development influences, so that further traumatizes the child. And it's not that it just perpetuates the cycle. It's not that these children have had, it's not that this is the only trauma, but it's in addition to all those other traumas that are quite critical. It's all quite critical, but at a critical stage of development between childhood and adulthood. So again, you saw in the age, we all felt very traumatized in lockdown with COVID and isolated. Imagine being that 22 hours a day when it's not in your control, and having worked for a couple of years in Parkville, it's noisy, it's loud, you're yelled at, it's seen as punitive, you've been told you've done the wrong thing, and that's why you're locked down, usually, unless there's staff issues, which is often the case. So it just further erodes your self-esteem, further erodes your sense of self, and exacerbates anxiety and depression. So very traumatizing.
Thanks, Mick. And we're aware that what young people tell us is that often these lockdowns or whatever are nothing to do with actually their behaviour. They are, as you said, staff shortages, or how managing COVID, which we understand was a need to do that at some level. But as it can absolutely seem at a whim for a young person, sometimes that happens, and the building up of anger and frustration as a result of that, and as you said, powerlessness and lack of agency is no doubt contributing to, I suppose, the situation in Parkville, where we are seeing assaults and other, really unfortunate behaviour. You mentioned the research in Western Australia and about underlying conditions or etc., and also how many of those hadn't been diagnosed, which is pretty shocking. So I suppose if you just, one more question for you for now is, how might cognitive impairment or an acquired brain injury or any of those other conditions that you referred to, how might that contribute to a young person making decisions that actually end up harming themselves and others?
Yeah, I mean, the lawyers talk about dolly incapacity. It's the capacity to make a decision informed. So there is, I think when I was in Parkville, about 20 to 25% of kids had an intellectual disability which was undiagnosed. So we were talking about holding kids responsible because of actions because of their disability. I think, I'm going to go tangential a bit, Julie, but I think that it really is a broken system that does not identify these needs. I think involvement in child protection and involvement in the justice system should be red flags for an assessment for these conditions. And I think if the government's saying, well, what are the solutions? What are the solutions? The solutions are preventative as well as at the time of the behaviour that gets them in trouble, in contact with the police. So if a lot of these, I spend a lot of time seeing kids who've been on the school roof or been with a knife. My first response is not to get the justice system involved, it's get an assessment of this child, so get an understanding of this child's family and circumstance, put in support so that it doesn't happen again, or which would mean educational psychology support, for example, developmental assessment by a paediatrician, an assessment by a psychologist to look at ADHD, depression, anxiety. So we know that a lot of this pathway, and linking up with NDIS now, if that's possible. So a lot of this trajectory can be diverted if we see involvement as child protection and justice as a red flag for proper developmental and mental health assessment of a child, because we know that the kids with decreased capacity or increased mental illness they're the ones more likely to end up in the justice system.
I think that's a really good way to look at it. Ending up there should be a red flag. I know the whole thing about speech development, language development, all of those things. Yeah, you're right. All of those things are a suite of issues that someone has to have addressed. And I know from my own practice years ago, the fact that a range of things weren't picked up, head injuries after a bike accident, thyroid problems, a range of things that can actually sit at the heart of this too, and the need for a really thorough assessment.
Yeah. And when the government says there's no solutions, well, there are. There's things we can do to prevent, and that's not what they're hearing. They're wanting solutions. If the kid's on the street at 11 o'clock at night, what shall we do? Well, it's too late. We need to invest upstream.
Yeah. Mick, thanks very much for that. So this is open to whoever wants to respond to this one. Okay, the young person does something that is problematic, and I hear what Mick's saying about further upstream, but now we're looking at the potential of lifting the age of criminal responsibility to 14. What I keep hearing is, but what do we do about young people who are doing things that would otherwise be called a criminal offence? What are we going to do? Are we going to step away from it? What are we going to do? So what might be a more effective response to a young person in trouble than a criminal justice response? So whoever wants to jump in, and we'll just keep our answers short, I think, so we can hear from as many people as possible. I think, Michelle, you're getting ready to respond?
Sorry, Julie. Just trying to unmute myself.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a tough question because, getting some earlier interventions put in place when a young person might only just sort of start becoming on the radar of school disengagement or issues with family, it's hard. I don't know if there's as many services as what there could be in that sort of space. The education department kind of liaising with families more about stuff that they're seeing at the school, or the lack of what they're not seeing at the school is also really important. And if there's those opportunities at that earlier age bracket to link families and link them into community, refer them on a lot earlier, I think it's going to put a bit of a dent in what we're seeing in the system now with younger cohorts sort of going into custody. And I heard what Mick was saying earlier about, undiagnosed disabilities in custody. And a lot of the time, we're waiting till a young person is sentenced at a court stage before a lawyer or somebody is requesting an assessment to take place. Yeah. To me, that's just far too late.
Thanks, Michelle. I can see, Mick, you've got your hand up. Mick, you're on mute.
Oh, I have a T-shirt. I'm on mute. Someone gave it to me. I think if we're talking age of 10, if we really want to talk about the raising the age issue, I mean, it's not that much difference to a 9-year-old, and police have processes of taking the kid home or back to child protection. So the approach should not be that much different to a 9-year-old, and its involvement with community, involvement with family. I mean, there's most of the kids who are at that age who are in custody are never found guilty. They're on remand, and they're often waiting for child protection to find a safe place for them to be. So I think there are, we know that locking them up doesn't work. We know that locking them up puts them on a trajectory of more likely to be locked up again. But involvement with family, involvement with elders in the community, involvement with services that can pick them up, which are alternatives to prison. And I'm not pushing child protection necessarily, because I know it's a sensitive issue in the community, but there needs to be some other agency or some other mechanism other than the justice system to support these children, whether it's child protection or the community service agencies like VACA or Anglicare, or a lot of those agencies could be funded to support these children as an alternative to locking them up, because they're often not dangerous. It's not,
Yeah, thanks very much. And unless someone puts their hand up on the panel, I'll move on to another. Did you want to say something? But no, I don't think anyone's responding. Okay, I just want to note something that's in the Q&A, a nice statement. John is Aaron's father. And do you remember Aaron talked about seeing his father on video when he was in jail? So John says, I'd just like to let you all know that I was involved in 4 Flats, which was the precursor to Jesuit Social Services, in 1977. I'm proud that Jesuit Social Services is still helping young people to feel stable in themselves and in the community. Thanks very much for that comment, John. I take that 2 ways, actually. Yes, we feel very faithful and committed to young people who end up being pushed to the margins, but it also points to that's 46, is it, years ago. And I think we have come some way to make the system better, but it also shows me we've got a long way to go, because we are seeing, intergenerational, the effects of intergenerational trauma. And I really like what Mick was saying and what Michelle was just pointing to. We have to keep pushing upstream and intervene earlier. And I think I really like, well, I'm going to ask you this, just you're a practitioner, medical practitioner. So that seems to me absolutely common sense, that someone ends up in child protection or youth justice, that there would be a thorough assessment, but it's not happening, is it?
No, there is. The government are funding a program called Pathway to Good Health if children are removed in the home care, but it's not rolled out to any scale, and it's just an assessment, and it's not hooked into any ongoing services after assessment. Yeah, so the government's talked about it for a while because they've realised the risk, but it's just not funded to scale, and a lot of Aboriginal kids are not getting access to the services, let alone other ethnic groups in Victoria, socially, culturally diverse groups. Yeah, so it makes sense, and I think the NDIS has changed the landscape a little bit, because we're locking up kids with disability because of behaviours due to their disability. So there's clear intervention available there. It should be happening, and I think we need to be pressing government more to invest in this, because it's a real need.
Thank you. We have a question in the Q&A. Is it beneficial to connect young people to each other? Do you have groups that learn to reflect deeply together more effectively, or is it better to keep personal issues separate? Which of our Jesuit Social Services staff would like to answer that? Okay, I'm going to, if no one jumps in.
I can speak to it a little bit.
Thanks, Ben.
So I think it's the cohort that we see in our program. It's 16 to 28-year-olds, those that are misusing substances and experiencing mental health difficulties. Generally speaking, these young people are extremely disconnected from others. We have a lot of people from out of home care background, who are now, you know, older, but still are not connected to their family or friends. So it's so important that there are lots of different barriers to get young people to connect with other young people. And in our program, we support in just building someone's confidence and thinking around what groups that they can link into, whether that's, you know, groups around their substance use, or if that's groups around like what they're interested in. But often these young people can feel really anxious and worried and are unsure how they'll be perceived in those situations. And I think as well, our service offers case management and counselling. We're often unpacking just those relationships and how to be friends and how to keep friends, because as you know, the different panelists have talked to, that trauma impacts someone's ability to respond to things, and often it's they are triggered and upset by other people and their behaviour. So it's supporting that young person to manage how they're coping and how they can make friends and connections with others, which is super important.
Thanks very much. A question in the Q&A is: research shows family violence exposure is a substantial source of trauma and potentially either a fourth trauma on top of what Mick mentioned. How many young people are you seeing who are both in the criminal justice system and also victim survivors of family violence? Mick, I'll just make a comment because in the opening, I said from the Youth Parole Board snapshot, they talk about 70% of young people in custody in Victoria are victims of abuse, trauma or neglect. That is the cohort that end up in custody, but you might have something else to add to that.
Not really. I mean, that's spot on. I think it's a common issue for removal. I think, like I said, Task Force 1000, which was reviewing at that time the 1,000 Aboriginal children in the state had been removed. It's now 2,000 children at any one time. It was about 85% in that cohort who were removed because of violence in the home. Sorry, there was violence in the home, and about 85% of the children had been removed. And yeah, so it is very. So whether they're victims per se or whether they've been exposed as young children, child protection will often not keep children in the home if the parents can't resolve the violence between themselves. It may not be violence directed towards the child.
Yes,
directly. It's exposed to violence in the home is also a common reason. It's probably, I don't know if that's counted in the figures.
Yeah, I think it is in that 70%. Yes, I think so. Thank you. Cameron?
Yeah, I'd just say maybe further to that, unfortunately, young people are often exposed to further violence in the out-of-home care system. Like I said, I'm not criticising the carers and the people involved, but they can end up in houses where their trauma is compounded, or they can end up in homes with several other young people where there is a lot of lack of safety and violence and other things which just only compound the domestic or family violence they might have experienced elsewhere.
Thanks, Cameron. While I've got you, I'm just going to ask you then, in and out of home care setting, what you did mention, and we're familiar with the fact that often people will ring the police, whereas a parent wouldn't necessarily. So in and out of home care setting, what options do you think workers have when a young person does something that does harm themselves or others?
Yeah, look, it's a challenge because the staff maybe need to try to keep everyone safe in the picture. So, but I guess trying to connect with that young person and connect to what's happening for them internally. And I guess co-regulation is a really powerful tool that you can use to help a young person regulate, because you're not going to be able to have much high-level conversation when someone's dysregulated. There's many, residential units are certainly improved. They're more trauma-informed, and you have therapeutic units that might have a clinician attached to the unit who helps advise staff on how to respond to a young person with connection, not with isolation, effectively. So I think there are many options. There's some very skilled workers who are good at doing that. But I think the danger is otherwise we reinforce the narrative that they're bad, that they already feel themselves, and people are too sometimes quick to ring police, or neighbours ring police, or other things happen. So I just think it's about connection. I think what Mick said is really valid with assessments. There's a lot of young people who are not assessed, and so they don't know what's happening for themselves. We don't know what's happening for them. So it's really hard to then support effective responses to that without the information. And I even remember an example of a young person when in a residential unit getting a sensory assessment, which I'd never really previously heard of, but he had so many sensory issues that were impacting on his ability to regulate himself. But it was only when we had extra funding and extra resources that assessment was even considered. But that was life-changing for him, to say there's reasons I get agitated and things, and it's to do with the environment, and it's to do with the amount of stimulation, even the clothes he was wearing. You know, there's a lot that can be done other than a punitive response.
And that points again, Mick, to your assessment. Like, I think really having a thorough assessment is really standing out for me as
and it's sad. It's sad Cameron said this is extra funding. It should be routine. I mean, it's saving money, to be honest. It would save money in the long term.
So why, some people, you know, will think someone's done the wrong thing, that's it. Why, you know, this is called worth a second chance. How many chances do you give? Why should we give a second chance and maybe a third and a fourth? And I'm going to start with you, Michelle.
There's a huge misconception out there that, you know, once a criminal, always a criminal. It's not the case. Like, if we can get in and start working with young people, there's always opportunity for change. There's opportunity for growth, for development, no matter what age group. You know, you can always learn a new skill. You can always be given an opportunity, but I think community need to let young people in and back in as well without judgment, whether it's a church group or a school, or, you know, even just within their own family home. It's just knowing that they don't want to be like that. They didn't want to make those choices, and they want to move away from that. No young person that I've ever spoken to says, I want to go from a justice prison to an adult prison. They just don't want that in their lives, and they want people to, I guess, listen to them and hear their stories and know a bit about their history to understand who they are and to be able to support them to be in the community again.
I think it also points to brain development too, doesn't it? I mean, what we're saying is a second chance, because really, Mick, you can correct me, is it still we're talking about, you know, up to the age of 28, that the young person's brain is developing? Is that, it was 25, then 25, I heard 25. Yeah. So in a sense, we've still got an opportunity to intervene, haven't we? And to help reset someone's life. That seems to me pretty essential as well. And why we need age-appropriate interventions. While the brain is still developing, what's possible. I think that's what, and which is partly why we chose this age of 15 to 17 for our little school. We could have gone earlier, but we're really trying to, it's like a last chance before hitting the adult system, intervening a bit more in that way. We're nearly finished, but Blanche, I just want to ask you a little bit. There's a question about what types of services are available to young people with addiction issues to help them recover, is the question.
So how, I suppose, the service system supports young people who have substance misuse issues is different catchments usually support young people in that particular area. And they can access either outreach, support, so someone coming to them and meeting them in a location. But often what is an issue, and especially the young people that we support, is that, you know, through various different reasons, people become homeless or they're moving around and are transient. So often, you know, the service system says, okay, well, you've moved over there, so you need to, you know, link in with another service. And it's really hard for a young person to, again, get to know a new person, you know, tell their story. It's really, really hard. So there's a lack of services that support someone and follow them through, depending on where that they are. And luckily, our program Connections, we get our referrals from the north and the west of Melbourne, but we can continue to support that young person across, you know, really the state. We're able to be flexible. So I think that that's what I would like to see, you know, moving forward, is that services are more flexible, because what we know is that relationships and people feeling understood is central to someone making change. So I really hope that in the future we can see just a greater flexibility in the service system.
Thanks very much. I'm going to move to some final comments now for our audience, because we want to give an opportunity to use their voice to also campaign for a more just system for young people. So first, though, let me thank all of the panelists for, you know, first of all, for the work you do every day. That's really what I want to say first and foremost. A lot of people don't value the people we value. And I think first and foremost, I want to say that thank you, because we really love our work, don't we? And we really value the people we work with, and see it as a privilege in many ways. And of course, as we accompany people, we learn not only about them, but we learn about what's not working in the system. And it's that is the other side of Jesuit social services. We often say we do, which is our accompaniment, and we influence. And that's what we want to see. We want to see system reform. And so the Worth a Second Chance campaign is very much at the heart of Jesuit social services' drive for that advocacy and reform. So if this is something in the audience that you feel strongly about too, there are ways of being involved with our vision through Worth a Second Chance. And we'd ask you to spread the message we've articulated this afternoon, that there needs to be a better and a more effective way of supporting young people to have lives where they thrive. It'll benefit everyone, as we've said, less crime, fewer victims, safer community. So you'll see on the screen some simple ways to be involved. You can join the Worth a Second Chance campaign and stay connected with this work by subscribing to receive our monthly email bulletin. And this bulletin shares news and progress about our efforts towards a more effective youth justice system. You can also connect with us on social media, on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And finally, I want to return to the topic of raising the age of criminal responsibility, which is featured today in our conversation. As we know, currently, children as young as 10 can be arrested, charged, and imprisoned in most places in Australia. It's great to see the momentum building about changing that, and to see the strong and decisive leadership starting to emerge to change this. Northern Territory, ACT, and promised in Victoria. So if it's an issue you feel strongly about, no matter where you are in Australia, can I ask you to write to your local Member of Parliament and tell them you want to raise the age to 14 years. That's a minimum. We need to see it at 14 years. At worthasecondchance.com, we have a link to find and email your MP with a suggested template email pre-filled. So we're making it easy for you. Do your bit and let's try and bring about change. Raising the age of criminal responsibility is an evidence-based, it's not just bleeding heart stuff, it's evidence-based, and it's an effective step that our leaders can take to keep young people accountable for their actions while supporting them to get their lives back on track. So today we've discussed many of the factors that contribute to young people's involvement in the justice system, and we've also shared some ideas. I hope that this has been useful for you. We were asked, would we do this webinar on this topic. We've in the past done webinars on a range of topics, including around our relationship with education and its importance, and also the importance of a pathway to employment. But we had some of our supporters, people who are part of a Worth a Second Chance campaign saying, but how does it happen that young people end up in this situation, and what can we do to prevent it? So that's what we've tried to address in some part today. So thanks to everyone for joining us. This concludes our webinar. Thanks again to our wonderful panelists. Very grateful to you, and to all of you for your interest and concern in this important issue, which affects children, some of whom are the most disadvantaged and marginalised in our community. Thanks, and together we can build a just society where everyone gets to flourish. Thanks then, bye.